my other co-founder, William, would be devastated I'm talking poorly about Heroes of the Storm. It's his favorite game.
I'm so sorry.
I'm very sorry. That sucks.
You can't even play it. I know, it's a bummer for him.
Oh boy. All right. So, hi. This is Hammered. This is episode 11. Again, I'm still surprised that we managed to get this podcast in the double digits. A few things before we kick everything off today. First of all, there's been something that Chowder and I have talked about a little bit over the past couple of weeks about the way in which the podcast itself is kind of structured. We are very well aware that we take some time at the beginning to kind of like feel out the waters, just see how comfortable we all are with each other, and that can oftentimes spawn a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with Siege in the slightest, and sometimes it does, but it's so tangential that when it comes to actually beginning a podcast episode, sometimes it's we're too far gone at that point to really be able to rein stuff back in. So at least for last episode, we were trying to see if we couldn't try to do something like that and launch right into that kind of discussion, and that's something that we're going to do our best to make sure that we can at least do to start with, and then if a tangent shows up during the episode, then that's fine, but at least for starting things out, to make sure, for future reference, we are doing our job and not going too off topic, at least for the very beginning. So if we can do that, then sweet. If we're not doing a good job, please yell at us, because the more caps that you respond in the comments for this episode, the more likely I am to either remove them outright or just ignore them. So
Don't get me wrong. There will be a point in this podcast where we spend about 10 minutes just dunking on the Denver Broncos and Midwest sports in general. That will absolutely happen. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen at first.
What about the 10 minutes talking about guerrilla fighting as well? I thought that was... I'm prepared to talk about that.
Gorilla fighting?
Wait, remember the time we talked about Joe Rogan last week? Remember?
Can you bring that up on the screen, Jamie? Jamie, these guys talked about gorilla fighting for 10 minutes while impersonating me. Can you bring that up, Jamie?
Jesus Christ. We didn't even talk about gorilla fighting for 10 minutes. We just talked about Joe Rogan talking about it for 10 minutes.
Wow, that's crazy. Have you heard about cryotherapy? Do you guys do DMT? It's great.
Jimmy, pull up the time that Elon Musk made a song about Harambe. Pull that one up. Is there behind the scenes footage on that? Jimmy, pull up 17 minutes of Elon Musk doing a song about Harambe. Yeah, we're okay. This is immediately what I was trying to not do.
I had to. I'm sorry, guys.
Somewhere along the way. All right.
So, our guest today is actually, he's not a player. He's not a coach. He's not an analyst. He's not necessarily a content creator. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. My name is Murph Vandervelde. I'm actually the co-founder of Oxygen Esports and the parent company behind Oxygen Esports, which is Helix Esports. And I'm lucky enough to be one of the co-owners of our Rainbow Six Siege team. Could not be more excited to be on the podcast, and thank you guys for having me. And no, we're not going to talk about Clubhouse strats for 40 minutes.
Oh, come on.
Oh boy, this is what happens when we just randomly start emailing people. I was actually kind of surprised when this opportunity came up. I think Chowder and I were talking about seeing what guests we couldn't get on for like the next couple of weeks in advance, and he goes, by the way, I've just so happened to have emailed Oxygen, or one of the influential people at Oxygen, and I'm like, are we really that notable enough that we could just go
No.
emailing?
They had a little comment box that was like, if you want to get in contact with us, fill it out here. And so I'm like, all right, here's a shot in the dark, and I shot it out, and Murph sent back an email going like, hey, I was like, hey, you can contact me at this email address or this phone number if that's easier. He's like, I recognize that area code. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Oh, so you're saying the only reason we were able to get Murph on here is because there's a little bit of local clout? Really? Is that it?
You fucking know it.
This really is going to be an hour and a half of dunking on the Broncos. Jesus Christ.
I've got foresight, though, so it won't be too much dunking on the Broncos, because I know we have some issues to work through this year alone. But no, I couldn't be more excited to be on the podcast. And I think, one of the things that you're going to see throughout the theme of kind of what Oxygen is, what is one of our guiding principles is transparency, and it's engaging with the community. So we wanted to hop on. I think you guys are some of the best in the Siege business and best throughout esports. So we wanted to hop on and have a conversation, allow people to interact with us. I know it's been a long month, but it's only been 28 days since we launched.
Mhm.
And so we want people to understand who we are, who our players are most, but also the management behind it, and start to put a face to the name, because I know it's kind of we materialize out of nowhere. So
Yeah.
it's good to start to interact with the community, especially in the off season. I know that it'll be a lot easier if we hopped into the thick of it, where there was season play going on and a lot of our teams were playing, but it just so happened with the pandemic and with just the way the seasons were structured that we inherited the rosters that we did at the time that we did. So it's been a big announcement, and then it's been wait and see. And so now it's us reaching out at a management level, but also a player level.
And you've already done one interview since coming into the scene, and that was with CHOWDERHEAD'S, but that was only something that you like. What did this send you a questionnaire, and then you just fill that out like over text, and then they publish that, or how did that interview work previously?
Yeah, we spoke with them. It was a Word document via email. It's a kind of a conversation back and forth. So it wasn't audio, but we've also our other co-founder William Colas is pretty influential on the Business of Esports podcast. We've talked there as well. So we've done that, but this is one of our first steps into the Siege, at least from a management perspective.
Yeah, and it's also the first time that we would be able to, like, I guess, put more of a face / a voice towards what Oxygen does, because I actually did an interview with Foxe, one of you guys' players, about 2 days ago, and there was the mentions of Oxygen, for all intents and purposes, just from the outset, from an outsider's perspective, as someone who's not involved or as not as involved as much as I wish I could be sometimes, but it seemed like everything was presented very well. I got a really good vibe about what Oxygen's trying to do, and we can dive a little bit more into specifics on exactly what that looks like over the course of, like, however, if we wanted to go another full 2 hours or something today. But just from what I'm looking at, even though there were people who were looking at the logo going, I don't know who these people are, and I don't know why it looks like it was made by some designer on Fiverr in 2 minutes. Aside from all of that, it does look as though everything from Oxygen's entrance into Siege has been handled pretty well so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really happy. I mean, I think it speaks to the players. First off, I listened to your entire interview with Foxe, and there was no contractual obligation for him to say nice things about us.
Okay, good.
I promise. But I think one of the themes as well is being empathetic, and really, it's fun. It's fun for us. The opportunity that we had is to step. You've watched a lot of the bigger organizations that we're competing against now, and they've had time to mature and step in and build all the infrastructure to kind of launch their rosters, launch their merchandise. Whereas we got to inherit awesome rosters, and that immediately brought a lot of attention to us. But because of the timing of what happened with Reciprocity and the timeline of which we needed to take on these rosters and then work with Ubisoft to announce the new league structure, we had a 2-week period really to put all this together. And so I think, while I would never say it's rushed. We're very happy we landed on the name. We're happy we landed on the branding, the colors. It was one of those things where we were launched right into the thick of things immediately. And so I think we're excited about the opportunity. We're excited where we are, but we're also very excited to continue to grow and get into the season play. Let our product speak for itself, as opposed to just our Twitter, we're done. We're very excited to watch our teams play and the fruit of their labor pay off. But also, to Fox's point, it's really a relationship, especially with these bigger players. They're super notoriable. They're very well spoken. They're very well thought of in the community. So it's not a you do what we want you to type do. It's going to be a very strong working relationship where they're going to help guide us because they've been in the scene for a long time. They know what their fans like. They know what the community likes. And so it's a lot of back and forth trying to listen. And so I think it's going to be a good relationship, and we're excited to work with them, our Rocket League team, our Gears team, our Fortnite players, the Genji, Hearthstone, and Magic rosters, and then future rosters moving forward.
Yeah, no, I was also going to say, you guys, not only did you acquire the Reciprocity rosters, you also performed that merger with Genji, which makes you pretty much from the ground running a international esports team.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think a little bit of background on the whole situation. So I mentioned Helix Esports. So my background in esports was I started a business with my little brother, my father, called Helix Esports. We own and operate 2 of the 5 largest LAN centers in the country, the largest in the country based on number of permanent stations right outside of New York City and North Bergen, New Jersey. And then our second facility is opening. It was open for about a week before the pandemic kicked off, but it's with the Craft Sports Group at Patriot Place, so it's attached to Gillette Stadium. And that's one of the top 5 largest in the entire country based on number of permanent stations. And so our background comes from building a transparent amateur to pro pipeline. And I think we'll touch on this as we to Ubisoft's vision, but just why fans should be excited about our entry into this. It's because we're going to help cultivate this amateur to pro scene and give people outside of the pro league, outside the challenger league, a fun ecosystem to play in, to start to hone their skills, to start to work their way up into these larger tournaments. And so I think that's where Helix came out of. But we also have a venture capital arm, and we've placed select investments throughout the space over the last 3 years, of which Genji was one. And so we saw our centers and some of the centers that we work with being a big network of talent. But how do you identify the talent coming out of those centers? How do you give people that platform from coming out of their basement to step up to the next level? And Genji's core strength is their analytics. And the Hearthstone and Magic team were built off of the analytics of the Harvard and MIT data scientists that they employ. And so they've used just data Moneyball for esports to take these teams from nothing about 15 to 16 months ago into world-class teams through analytics. And so when we had the reciprocity opportunity, it made sense to roll our pool of players, the centers, this amateur proving ground with the analytics, with the pro team, kind of as a full circle, like a full stack esports play, in the sense that kids are motivated to come play in our smaller tournaments, to prove themselves, to get an opportunity to look for oxygen, but also for oxygen to get better talent and better academy systems underneath our pro rosters to support an economic play into esports. So instead of having to pay high transfer fees for players if we're entering a new space, a new game, we can actually look at the existing talent pool based on our analytics and say, we feel very confident that these players comp well compared to the high profile players. And we think we can field a competitive roster for a really competitive rate. So that's a bit of a background on the whole scenario, how it all came together, but how it all plays together.
I mean,
all of that is news to me. That's crazy.
I was reading about this somewhat. That's an incredibly novel concept, the idea that you can build land setters to foster and develop talent to eventually hire on to your esports team.
Yeah. And the idea also, and I think the most important piece is that's one part of it. I think the most important piece is that it's supposed to be social. I think for the longest time, gaming has been, people see it as an antisocial habit, but it's actually the exact opposite. People just haven't had a place to go do it in person. So it really functions as a competitive proving ground, but also a social, people just coming in for our high school leagues, but also for birthday parties, corporate parties. And so it's a both. So there'll be beacons in the community for gamers to go out, hang out, kind of create their own little sub-communities in person. And so that's what we relate. But also the talent, it makes sense. I mean, we have smaller tournaments, kids can prove themselves. It's less high stakes than traveling to a LAN where you're spending a ton of money. If you have a bunch of these in a local market, it's a drive, not a flight. You don't need to stake these massive team fees like some of the bigger tournaments are. And I think, unfortunately, one of the repercussions of COVID was we were working with AGN to put on an amateur LAN for Siege in July at our Foxborough location. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to have to postpone that, but with our entry into Siege and working with Che and Rob over at Ubisoft, there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff coming from just working with our centers, leveraging the publisher relationship to drive a really rich ecosystem below the challenger leagues and the more notariable leagues, and trying to really engage the community as a whole.
Everything about that is exciting, only in the sense that we have had this problem over the course of the past couple of years with the North American Tier 3 system, where everything below Challenger League, in some cases Challenger League, but mostly everything below that, not really having a super strong basis or being taken nearly as seriously as the things above it. And as much as that makes sense, you obviously want to spend, all your time and your resources focusing on all of the top tier competition and making sure that all, is the highest standard of play that it can be. When it comes to what happens in North America below that, to hear that there's one massive effort to make sure that all of that can, if not get contained, at least still get promoted. There's a lot more, investment into all the stuff that's happening at a grassroots level. That is already super, super cool. So whatever can be fostered out of a system like that, I know that I'm down for it. I know Chowder's down for it, because both of us recognize that we needed some, I guess, overhaul in some sense to what the system below CL looks like, because when it gets to a point where the guys who are below Challenger League are just trying to like form a team to make Challenger League, they won't have too much of an incentive to like stick together. Sometimes they're more inclined to go for a roster swap, or there's less team cohesion or chemistry because they're making moves that they think are best for them. But when it comes down to it, they're not going to do the thing that helps from a longevity standpoint, and then it will keep on affecting them over and over and over again. So when that happens, I don't exactly know in what way you guys are going to be handling that sort of thing, other than people can come to our facilities, they can play, find people that they want to continue to team with, and then from there, how does your do you have any idea on how that lower tournament system works?
Yeah, so so right now there's nothing official with Ubisoft to function as what will be sanctioned tournaments from Ubisoft, but what we do is we follow the community guidelines. So for our games, bigger games that we've used for Fortnite or Call of Duty, we'll just host amateur tournaments.
Right.
We stake the prize pools, people pay entry fees. And I think when I was talking with the folks over at AGN, they're great to work with. I think we want to work with them again. We want to work with them on something moving forward. There really haven't been many amateur lands. I think the last people we're talking about was DreamHack, where it was open. There I guess open qualifiers, and so I think there's been a huge lack, at least in the Northeast, of amateur tournaments, even to enter in, even if it's not Ubisoft sanctioned, where you're going ahead and it's saying this is going to feed up, you're going to get qualified for pro points. Just a lack of competition, the lack of the ability for people to go out and compete at a local level is frustrating when there's such rich scenes in other games that are in other games. I mean, you look at Fortnite, you look at Call of Duty, Smash. These are huge, vibrant local scenes where players who aren't ever going to be like a Foxa or a Laxing or like the rest of our roster can still make a name for themselves. It's kind of, if you look at it from I think the most transferable is golf. There's the PGA Tour, but then there's a club champion at every single club. Every club throughout the world. And I'm not a huge golfer. I'm actually horrible at golf, but it works well that there's a handicapping system and that you can still be the best in a small pond. And I think that's the most important part, is creating this more transparent pipeline to pro and giving people, and it's not just you go from your basement to an overnight sensation. It's really giving younger kids the opportunity to come out and have competitions where they can kind of hone their skills, play on land before they have to go. Imagine being your first land going to play in Tokyo.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. It's crazy. And as an athlete growing up, there is that really structured path to go to the next level. It's not always easy, but there's a structured path. And for esports, that was where we entered the space, that there's not a structured path. There's not an amateur to pro pipeline. And so I think that was frustrating a lot of people. And so what we're trying to do is build that. And so while there's nothing official with Ubisoft yet, we're working obviously with the publisher to find a way to use our Helix centers and use our network of friendly centers to put on more local and regional tournaments. So the community, there's a competitive community below the top 50 teams in the entire world.
All right. In the terms of, Chowder, did you want to do anything else on specifically like the local thing, or do we want to get into more about the whole Siege Arm as a whole?
Let's get into Siege Arm as a whole.
All right, so this probably will delve a lot into the whole reciprocity merger / pickup, which I know plenty of people are probably interested in some of the business aspects behind that. But when it came time for reciprocity to say, okay, we have to go underground, we have to preserve what we have, we're not going to be able to get the funding that we very clearly need because of the pandemic. What was the process like for you guys, and who I'm assuming is Genji, to be able to connect with Rec and find out whether picking up their Siege team and their Rocket League team was a possibility for you at the time?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point to introduce. The outside of my little brother and my father, who run the Helix side of the house, our two other co-founders on Genji and on Oxygen are Adam Morrison and William Colas, and then Faraz, who works out of the European office for Genji. And Adam was actually an original co-founder of Reciprocity. And so he had the connection in with Chad and the rest of the team. Adam then, after a couple of years at Rec, left to go pursue a couple of other options. And when this opportunity came about, William and Adam had an inside look at what was going on. And I think it's just different cycles. where, I mean, Reciprocity's been, it was a household name for a long time. Unfortunately, sometimes it's just unfortunate cycles like this happen. And we felt that we're in a good position now with where Genji and Helix were from a financial and from a positioning perspective to make an investment. And it just worked out timing wise. And I think that was one of the important things. There was a bit of, I know you talked about it with Foxa yesterday or a couple of days ago, about why Reciprocity got to keep their slot and why a couple other teams weren't able to. And it was because there was ongoing conversations behind the scenes beforehand. And so I think that there was a port for that team, and by port I mean a ship without a port. There was a port for that team regardless of the outcome, and it was whether Reciprocity was going to be able to figure out funding. There was an organization that was going to be able to fully fund this team, keep them on contracts for the next couple of years, keep them in their team house out in Vegas, and follow all the league guidelines. I think that was the certainty in the relationship that William has actually built with some of the players over at Ubisoft, from Hearthstone, from Heroes of the Storm beforehand, some of their previous background. That was why the team, and obviously it's a world-class roster. You'd hate to see the personalities, the talent, the great group of guys that we have not being able to compete. So I think it was a win-win for everybody. I think Reciprocity was able to make a move at the time they needed to. We were able to step into a world-class set of guys, a world-class roster, and Ubisoft was able to keep some of their more talented players and some of the more coveted fandoms for this team engaged in the game. And I think it worked out for everybody really well.
Yeah.
And Dead Space. No.
No, I mean, it's really interesting. And I think that your acquisition of the Reciprocity roster brings us to another topic that I find interesting, which is sort of you come from not as much of a player background as something like Fnatic or G2 would come from. You come from more of a finance background.
Yeah, I think if you look across my background personally, yes. I mean, I did. So I think part of my, at least my background is I played semi-pro Call of Duty when I was in high school, and what really stopped me from was that lack of transparency back then. It was kind of, there was this big group of players that kind of seemed to transfer titles, and it was hard to move. So, and then I was an athlete. So from an esports player perspective, I don't understand the professional level, but I've played sports at a high enough level where I understand what it takes to get there. So I have that drive and that competitiveness. But Adam and Faraz and William, they've been entrenched in the esports space, especially on the team side, for a long time now. So they bring that level of expertise. But I think it's a good blend of having the athletic and the business side of things, and then we've got William and Faraz and Adam, who are very well versed on the business side of the things, but they have that player. They have the ability to go down to the player level and understand some of the nuances of managing esports players and esports talent, particularly where you've got kids who could be as young as 13 on your roster for Fortnite, and it's managing the egos inside of teams. It's not too different to a sports team, but the personality types of a professional athlete versus a professional esports athlete can be very different, just from the sense that typically with esports players, they can be more introverted. So it's finding ways to manage that particularly. And so we have a lot of expertise on that side. So it's a good blend of business, player, being in tune with the players, and then talent identification, which is also huge.
So with your talent identification process, do you see anywhere else that you could reasonably start going? I mean, you guys have some what would technically Rainbow Six Siege recently was called a tier 1 esport by the Esports Insider. But you guys have been moving into more of a tier 2, tier 3 space with acquisitions with the merger with Genji in the Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering areas, and also with the Rocket League roster.
Yeah, and so I think if you look at our approach, it's the tiering is important, but it's also the entry, how you enter the leagues is how we look at it. If you look at the rest of Dota, obviously I think they're moving to a new format, which is interesting, and I think there's certainly an analytics play there as well. So I think Dota is also but if you look at, I think the two others were Counter-Strike and League.
Yes.
And those right now have significant buy-ins.
Yeah.
And so if you look at it for us coming into the space, we're trying to find similarly structured leagues where the buy-in isn't as significant because, like, for us right now, the jury's still out whether or not those franchise slots are going to pan out in the long term. And so for us, we're trying to find similar structure, and that's the beauty of Rocket League. That's the beauty of Siege, especially Siege. It's got the exact same publisher commitment, publisher buy-in. It's got the gated, what we'll call a gated league, but it's not forcing its organizations to pay an exorbitant fee up front to participate. And it's a very fair financial arrangement for Ubisoft, for the players, and for the organizations. And so it's finding the leagues where you can get talent for fair levels. And the most important piece, these guys are the talent. They are the stars of the show. They need to be paid. But for organizations, for it to make sense, there needs to be a way that organizations can continue to feed themselves to feed the players. And in order for the league to want to do it, it needs to make sense for the publisher to be able to either get enough eyeballs on it where it's worth the exposure or make money from licensing deals. And so it's less so the tier of the game, it's more so the structure, because ultimately I think the leagues that are best positioned will ultimately garner those eyeballs. And the publishers that are the best positioned are also going to be able to garner those eyeballs. I think if you look at our entry into Gears, it's no wonder it's a Microsoft title. And I think there's a bunch of other very large titles coming out from Microsoft. So it's positioning with the right publishers. And I think Psyonix and Epic are one of them. Activision Blizzard is one of them with Hearthstone. I think Ubisoft is world class. I've loved working with the guys over there. They're unbelievable. They've been such a resource and a help as we've gotten a crash course over the last 28 days or in change on Siege. And so it's and that's not my saying that we'll never enter a large franchise space, but as a scrappy young org, it didn't make sense for us to allocate that significant a chunk of our capital to buying into one of those leagues yet.
You don't want to spend $25 million for a Call of Duty team? No? I mean, you
really want to go that far?
What, like 2 months? Come on.
Exactly. And so and I think there probably will be an opportunity for organizations like us to be able to pick off some of those spots at a discount at some time down the future. And I'm hopeful that that's not the case, because I think league health indicates the health of esports, but I think there's going to be opportunities where people have mismanaged it, where people have put too much into it or valued it too much and are going to have to take a bit of a haircut. I think that's when you want to enter the space. And so it's all about for us, it's finding the right time to enter the space. And I think with the Rainbow Six and the Rocket League rosters, it was the right time. It was the right opportunity. We looked at a bunch of other opportunities before Reciprocity, and it just wasn't the right time. And for us, it needed to make sense. It needed to be sustainable. We don't want to be one of those organizations that comes in and 6 months later, it's like, where the hell did they go? Yeah, and so I think that's the most important part. But we're definitely looking at the tier 1 esports. We're looking at the tier 2s as well, because I think there's lots of announcements that we're going to see from some of the tier 2s that are going to be, all of a sudden, it's going to be, wow, that's really significant. And there could be some org making, and not just Oxygen, but teams that invest in these leagues, that all of a sudden, wow, that was a really smart decision 2 or 3 years from now. The economics of the league, the economics around the players, the licensing deals, just the overall exposure, that was awesome. And so when most people are looking one way, just look another way, because there might be an opportunity that's not as shiny yet, but that it's that there's real substance to it.
I mean, look at something like if we look at something like Rocket League, right? Rocket League esports is sort of this crazy miracle thing, because when we think about it,
absolutely was not supposed to be as successful and notable wasn't. As it is. Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen the No Clip documentary with Psyonix.
It is so good, by the way. That is top tier.
I've got to check it out.
It's a fascinating look, but basically Psyonix talks about how they had no idea how their game would do, and they were basically they released the game on PlayStation Plus first, and effectively had I think by the end of the month 20 million installs. 20 million?
Oh my god.
And that was back when it was on PlayStation. If you had paid for the model, then you got it, but only for a certain amount of time. So it wasn't like a formal PlayStation Store
by the end of
release.
the year they had 20 million installs, but in a month they had 5 million installs. And
there we go.
Basically, just Rocket League went wild. and
Yeah.
nobody could have predicted it. So I do think that it's an interesting look to see, instead of going to what's popular, instead finding something that's not popular yet, but could be popular later.
Yeah,
Right?
I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
And I think with Psyonix's acquisition by Epic, I mean, if you look at the amount of support and prize money Epic's putting into Fortnite,
Oh yeah.
it would bode well that there's something significant coming for Rocket League and Psyonix. And I think
Yeah.
building on an unbelievable game is also a game that's approachable to watch too. I mean that it's about as comparable to a traditional sport as you can get. It's soccer with cars.
I can't dribble for shit in Rocket
Oh
League.
no, I
but-
can't do it. But
But I love watching it. Are you kidding me? It's great. Oh yeah.
but I understand when a car hits the ball into a net, it's a goal. But then all of a sudden, my mom tries to watch Siege, and she's like, "What did they just blow up through the ceiling and then drop something
Exactly,
onto the
yeah.
floor down below?"
Yeah.
It's like,
It's like you want to get into Counter-Strike because Counter-Strike is simplistic. You want to get into Rocket League because Rocket League is probably the most simplistic esport you could find on the face of the planet. And then you get into Siege, which to me, even though it does have that tier 1 rating by the Esports Observer, as much as I want to like tout it as being phenomenal in that sense, I know as someone who's in the scene pretty deep at this point, there are enough things that happen in enough ways that we talk about the scene for Siege by itself that I'm kind of like, I wonder if we actually like still deserve this or not. Like if this is something that we can really like with confidence say this is one of the best 4 esports in the world. And from the observer's perspective, I understand it. They're running a model. It's the same model for every other esport that they've ever put into their tier system, so I get it. But when it comes down to it, I almost feel like Siege still has some things that it could work on. So was there anything that when you had the opportunity in front of you to grab Reciprocity's rosters, was there anything that you looked at as like a super significant risk when it came to entering Siege for the first time?
nothing with Siege in particular. I mean, you look at every game, and there's title risk. I think that's the most. I think that's going ahead and acquiring a roster of players. I always look at, is the player, can they be are they a personality? Can the players also become personalities? Because there's title risk inherent in every game. And I actually think Siege is an awesome title because if you look, it's been around for a long time and it's kept consistent. It's growing its viewership. Its player base, I think, doubled last year, which is unbelievable for a title that's not 2 years out. I mean, it's like when I look at Siege, I also look at the management that's running the esports and running the publisher, and we're not as in tune with the game dev side. But with Che and Rob and the rest of it's a world-class staff that understands and is willing to learn from some of the mistakes that peers have made in the space, maybe around like how the Overwatch League has been run or how the investments made in the Overwatch League. But I think if you look at what the viewership and all the metrics Esports Observer have put together, or Esports Insider, which I forget who published that article, and you look at the investment in the space, you look at the investment that Siege is making, it definitely deserves to be up there, and it's encouraging. And I think that strong leadership with a support by the publisher, a multi-year support by the publisher, it bodes well for the title. I think it does, and I think the rejiggering and the rethinking of the amateur and the scene below also bodes well. And I think that there's a lot of teams and players that are not necessarily competing at the highest level should be excited about the opportunities that are coming, because I think people were a little bit disappointed by some of the opportunities that had come by in the last couple of years. I think that's going to change drastically over the next 2 or 3 years, because just the amount of resources from a human perspective that Ubisoft's funneling into the new league play, into the new structure, all the thought, and then also the tiers below it. It's really significant, and I think they're doing a great job, and I think I'm excited to work with them, and so is the rest of our team, to find ways where you can leverage all of the organizations who are bought in and their strengths to start to maybe bring things to a local market where you have home stands, and it's not just out in Vegas. So I think there's all types of ways that Ubisoft has also picked the people who are playing the league that can help them grow the game. Mm-hmm. So I think I don't look at Siege as that much of a risk at all. It's stable. I think stability is. I think hyper growth is actually sort of scary in the sense that you look at if you can only sell X amount for sponsorships with Fortnite at 100 million players, what happens when it starts to decline? But if you look at Siege, it's steady, 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 and it grows, but it's not hyperbolic. It's not up and down. And so I think that bodes well for the scene. I think it bodes well for the people, and I think it bodes well for the future as well. And I think going back to the whole thing, there's not any particular risk of Siege. It's just title risk in general in esports.
Yeah, I mean, we look at something like Fortnite and see its monthly and daily active users are just obscenely volatile. I mean, they had, what was it? I think the most active users at any game in history 2 weeks ago? Was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? For the Travis Scott concert.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, man, they had active users in a client. Yeah, I mean, I guess it technically does qualify because it happened within the game. It was meant to be on the platform.
If I remember correctly. Right? Which is...
I remember the event, yeah.
It's crazy, right? But then we look at that and we see that that's for a concert, and then we look at something like they have Diplo concerts and Marshmello concerts, and it's becoming more and more that Fortnite is a social space, and it's also interesting to see them sort of try to balance Fortnite as a social space and a communal space, and Fortnite as an esport, where something like Siege or Hearthstone can just say, we're just an esport. You don't come here to watch music videos.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised about we're kind of going back to Second Life in a way. All of a sudden, Fortnite became the Zoomer Second Life because everyone would run concerts and whatnot in a space like that, and I'm like, it turns into a. I'm not trying to like make I am trying to make a really weird comparison, but it turned into like you have a game, but then you have something that you launch in the exact same program, and it's a lifestyle thing, like that kind of spawned out of nowhere.
Second Life is sort of interesting because something resembling Second Life has existed as long as, I don't know, I guess the internet.
Which one? I'm trying to think of which one.
Before there was like literally graphical programming, like images on the internet, when it was all text, there were these things called MUDs, which is a multi-user dungeon. And basically think of them as very long-form forum RP posts. Some of them have been going on for 45, 50 years.
What?
And like...
like a broken relic of the internet that's just there?
Yeah, like some of them have been going on since the early 80s.
It's like a.com probably, or b.com.
They're not
that's
even
the,
.coms,
that's the URL.
they're just ISPs. Yeah, no, they're just like, or not ISPs,
IP addresses?
IP addresses, yeah, no. Some of them have been going on for decades, right? Not 40 or 50 years, but...
I was going to say, I mean, since the 80s, it would have been... Well, it would have been 40 if it was in the early 80s, yeah.
Right? But, and then that got changed, right, with the introduction of graphical-based video games and the introduction of a lot of these online social spaces with the Usenet forums, and then the Usenet forums transitioned into... I mean, pretty much Second Life, and then Second Life, weirdly enough, transitioned into Minecraft. And then from Minecraft, we jumped to Fortnite, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Because the
idea it's more like just the idea of you can take something that happens in the outside world, try to transpose it into, the graphical setting that is the computer that quite literally anybody can use, but it turned what was just meant to be a game that had, admittedly very early on for Fortnite, a very healthy market. It had a lot of things going right for it, a massive publisher that was willing to pour the resources into doing what it needed to do very quickly. But then as it went on, all of a sudden now we're seeing it, it can pull these numbers in when we're able to get a really big name to show up for 15 minutes for this event that we've programmed. And then there's the esports side of things, which I feel like continues to get less and less notable because of how confusing it can get. Or that's just how I've seen it recently. So I don't know if that continues to have like longevity behind it. I mean, that might just be the case for any game similar to Fortnite. Like any battle royale will obviously be something that it takes a long time to get like an audience behind. It's like, you fight to be the last team standing, but what do you focus on? Like it can get really confusing just from an observer standpoint. Yeah. So it's immediately a turnoff to some people.
I mean, we think about there are Minecraft music concerts.
Are there seriously?
Yeah. Block by Block West was huge. I don't know what you're like. I wish I was kidding when it was called Block by Block West.
What the? Okay.
or better yet, the University of Blockley. I believe that they delivered a commencement speech for UC Berkeley through Minecraft.
Yeah.
I think it was the Razer, the president of Razer. Thank you, by the way, Razer, for being a sponsor of Helix. I appreciate that. Had to do it. I'm contractually obligated to do that. No.
Oh, God.
The president of Razer delivered a speech through Minecraft as a commencement speech to the University of Berkeley, and they cleverly named it the University of Blockley, I believe was the play.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there's recently, I think it's, what was it? It was like Diplo and who else?
Dylan Francis and Steve Aoki.
Yeah.
Fortnite.
A-Track, Toki Monster, they're all going to be performing at Electric Blockaloo. Right?
All right, wow. I might actually tune in for this. This actually sounds great.
These are ticketed events. You have to pay money to enter them, right?
Do you really? Wait, did Fortnite have to do that with Travis Scott, or did you just log in?
No, you just logged in. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
You just logged in, right? But for a lot of these concerts, these are either ways for indie musicians to get sort of a worldwide audience on a bigger scale. You know, there's a musician I follow, Dorian Electra. They recently did a one of these Minecraft concerts, and a lot of the COVID activism, because a lot of these musicians still want to perform in front of a live audience. But doing that is sort of impersonal, even if it is, you know, you sitting in a DJ with a webcam and sort of everyone sees you on Zoom. That's a lot impersonal. But what you can do is you can get in Minecraft, which can host hundreds of people on these servers, right?
Right.
And you can just jam a concert down right there, just like a small form factor concert.
So what I'm hearing is we need to find a way for Ubisoft to adopt this for Siege. Because all I want to see is a whole bunch of people just picking. Well, like what they need to do is they need to make all the character models anatomically correct, so we can actually have Mozzie be like this short down here, and then there's Jackal and Kate all the way over here, like 7'2", and then we just get the two of them together, and it's just dubstep in Siege.
I thought, are we not gonna get like Skrillex there, and we just QEC to the mute, you know?
Yeah, we need to get. I mean, isn't the whole map of Coastline just one massive party house?
It is
can't we just use that for that?
Why can't we have a party on Coastline, huh?
Come on, dude. Or we can have a
get cranking.
We can have a really classical concert in piano room on the top of cafe. We can.
There's a lot of musical instruments in Siege, isn't there?
There's a jukebox. There's a whole like bar area jukebox on Clubhouse. Back to Clubhouse strats. There's a lot of references. Like Ubi, we're giving you a way to make money here.
I don't know that artists would necessarily want their music in Siege though, because the first thing. No. Because the first thing we do on any map is just immediate. Yeah, just punch the jukebox.
That's what I know. That's what I know. So you just destroy the map to build it back up.
Right? So
oh no.
It's just, oh man, we put Skrillex in the jukebox, and you hear 3.5 seconds of it before your Kaid walks over and just beats it to death with an electric claw, right?
God, I remember the time Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites was cool. Dead. Just gone.
Man, I was listening to that. Come on. It's just...
People end up spending the entirety of rounds doing nothing but listening to the music and not focusing on the game. And then someone comes up the back stairs and just shoots him in the head and go, "Hey, I was listening to Skrillex."
Yeah. No, but it's, video games are becoming sort of, what's really interesting to see is, and I guess here's a tangent that we could all talk about. It's really interesting to see the transition from video games from an insular experience on something like, the NES or a lot of that stuff, where a lot of the stuff was primarily for high scores, when it came out of the arcades and it became more insular, to, with the advent of multiplayer, sort of these giant user experiences, to see them go back to their roots from what they were in the arcade, which is sort of this big multiplayer, not necessarily everyone playing at the same time, but this big social space.
And I take it even further with the kind of what we talk about with Helix. It's bringing it back out of the house as well. I think that there was the ability to do it at your home was novel, and now it's okay, I can do it at my house, but there's an added level of experience, an added level of fun of taking it to a center, of all of a sudden playing a custom war like a lobby of Fortnite, but you've got all 16 kids sitting on top of each other. So when you destroy somebody, you get to go up and actually talk shit to them in person. Oh no! And so
we've lost the fine art of trash talking because everyone's online. So what we need to do is get all these kids to actually face their demons, face their bullies in real life, right there, 2 rows down from you. Oh boy,
it adds a little accountability as well. I think it's interesting.
Spice, yeah.
I don't know how I've never seen a Siege LAN, so I don't have any experience, but I know from our COD LANs, they're about as toxic as it gets.
And so Siege LANs are... Okay, first of all, there is nothing as toxic as a COD LAN. Let's get this out of the way.
We'll set the precedent first. All right.
Full stop. It goes COD LAN, Gears LAN, and then everything else. Right? Because at like Gears LANs, actual fist fights sometimes break out because
whoa. Yeah, let's get Bellion here to talk about those.
Yeah, right? But so in sort of Siege, most of the trash talking is done by a few people. For the most part, it's a lot of respect. Like, you know, we like them, but we're going to have to beat them. And everyone claps and goes, okay, yeah. But, you know, there's been sort of more of a push in Siege for more personalities to sort of show themselves. And there's this player, Fabian. And I'm going to butcher his last name, Fabian Halstead or something. Fabian, apologies. I cannot speak your hurdy-gurdy language.
That wasn't even that bad, honestly. I mean, so long as you're able to pronounce smorgasbord correctly, then you're probably fine.
Yeah, I can't pronounce smorgasbord correctly. So Fabian came out, I believe it was the Atlantic City Major. Fabian came out, and the host was like, Fabian, you're not wearing any shoes. And Fabian looks directly at the crowd and says, why would I wear shoes in my house? Right? And so...
Which we didn't really have a whole bunch of at that point.
We didn't have that, right? And so it's been interesting to see Siege move more and more and more into personality-based stuff, right? And you've talked about this with Fox and Lax, where they have these big, not egos, but larger-than-life personalities, and how that's sort of important to building a brand's reputation. And then we can also see things like Canadian on Space Station, people like Pengu on G2, people like Zig and Nesk, who Zig used to play for Liquid, and Nesk currently plays for Liquid, and how we're seeing all of these different personalities sort of start to rise up, right?
To that extent, I almost feel like it's because we're at a stage where we will get all of these personalities to form, and we'll get a lot of this trash talk level of stuff when it comes to Siege. It has to get to the point where the esport itself feels like it's in a good enough place before we can get to the point where trash talk becomes something that happens more often. And I wonder if that's because Siege just hasn't been around in the space nearly as long as a Counter-Strike or a Call of Duty or anything like that, because, you know, it's only been a thing since 2015, 2016. So when it comes time for, you know, everyone to be like, all right, Siege, show us what you got. Are you more entertaining than Call of Duty? And most of the time the answer is no. But I've wondered for a little bit if that's because other esports have that longevity and they've already like had an established fan base. There's a lot of investment that's been put into them. They're stable. They already know that if, you know, someone says something in trash talk or in disrespect, that it won't like ruin someone's career. But then when it came time for Siege to get like this, like a similar treatment, it's almost like everyone in Siege is still like, yeah, nice game, good job guys, really appreciate it. Thank you for that. That was a fun match. Sucks that we lost, but we'll get them next time. And there's no one that's on a LAN yet who is completely raging out about stuff, and I'm like, I want to see more of this, but I also wonder if part of it's because everyone in Siege is just still too reluctant to like speak up and get loud.
Yeah,
and animosity takes time to breed as well. I mean, you look at COD; this guy's been going at it for 10 titles now. It's the same. It's the same. It's a group of, I go back to, I call them the cabal. They just sit at the top, and they've been at the top of the title forever, and they kind of control the whole scene. I mean, it was Siege, and I think when you see the U.S. League move towards LAN, you're going to get some of those uncomfortable encounters where I can mute my mic and say something after a game. If you're on the other side of the stage and you have you say something about the other team after you win or after you lose, it's being in person, the whole land piece, it adds an element to that story. And I think it takes a little bit of time to build those rivalries and the animosity. And I think with the league stabilizing as well, in the sense of team involvement and being gated, you're also going to see you could totally destroy somebody that all of a sudden 2 weeks later is your teammate.
Yeah.
And I know that can happen. I know that can happen in any sport, and so people need to be wary of that. But particularly in esports, where people in these less gated leagues, where player transfers are more fluid, and you kind of need to be careful, because all of a sudden you could have a couple of people, and obviously you wouldn't do it from a team perspective, but it's a possibility. And so I think you'll start to see, as things stabilize and team rivalries start to, I think that's the hardest part, is cultivating these team rivalries, like a Red Sox Yankees. I can't say the Patriots versus the Broncos because it was never a competition, but
Never. Okay, hey, Jesus Christ!
I told you I'd go there.
Hey,
at
we
some
gotta
point,
go there
but
at
not
some
for too
point.
long.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna point us back to the 2016 AFC Championship game where we had to pick you off at the goal line for a 2-point conversion. You fucking scrubs. Anyway.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we're going there.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The last
don't
time
have
we had
enough
success,
time.
it had to go through you. No, it's fine.
We don't have enough time in this 2-hour podcast to talk about the success
definitely
of the Patriots. So I can't even. I could do 2 hours on it alone.
Right.
But it takes time to build that and stabilizing personalities and team dynamics to create that, not player to player rivalry, but also the team to team rivalry, where you get a bloodbath if it's TSM versus OXG or Space Station versus E United. You're not I think you'll start to see a stabilization of the cores of the rosters, and you'll see that rivalry just start to build. And I think, obviously, as Ubisoft's investment grows, they're going to start to hype up the storylines behind everything with the production value, and that's also going to feed into it. And so it's going to be fun to watch that evolve. And our stories centered around performance, and so I think our guys are going to speak with their play. But I'd be excited to see Fox to throw a couple of backhanded comments across the aisle after a good win.
Yeah,
I'm really interested to see if we get a situation where the Sonics are touted as one of the most potential up and coming teams doing really well, and Super is the guy that we know in North America who will obviously want to stir that kind of stuff up. If he does really well, he will become insufferable, and if he does really bad, he will still be insufferable, but that's because he won't stop talking due to his team's lack of performance. Like just like basic things like that. Just being able to look at the guys who we already know are not drama figures, but are like very notable or almost infamous in some cases for the way in which they choose to conduct themselves online. When it translates to in real life, I know I'm excited for it, but I'm also like, you mentioned it yourself, with production value and this being on a weekly basis, sometimes more than weekly if it happens, like 2 play days per week or whatever, then when it comes time for everyone to show up, there can be that face-to-face confrontation sort of thing. I'm wondering how the Siege audience is going to react to it, and I'm honestly super pumped for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to letting animosities and these things foster rivals, I've been looking at sort of some of the famous players in a lot of other leagues who've had serious rivalries, and something that I always go back to is Huck and Indra. And this is going to get into something that neither of you two know anything about. And
you're darn right I don't.
Is this StarCraft?
You fucking know it's StarCraft.
No way. Okay.
Hold on. I know Huck.
Welcome back to Hammered, the best Siege podcast about StarCraft in history. Go ahead.
Actually, it's
we know
StarCraft
Huck.
Brood War. Get it fucking right.
Yeah, Huck's the GM over at the Uprising, and their practice facilities contained inside Helix. So we see Huck every day. He's a good dude, and I recognize the name.
Yeah, no. But Huck is a good dude, right? But there was this guy named Indra, and Indra was, by his own admission, just a hyper-competitive piece of shit. And, like, Idra. And so Idra, basically, just Huck and Idra used to go at it for years, and it would be Huck would win, Idra would win, Huck would win. Pretty famously, Idra left in the middle of the match, just didn't even GG concede. He just alt F4'd against a goddamn swarm of fake enemies. Right? He didn't realize they were fake. He just popped out of the match. And eventually what happened was Huck was on Evil Geniuses, and eventually Evil Geniuses signed Idra. Right? So you had these two players who were at the peak of their rivalry and were forced to be on the same team.
That must have been fun.
Right? It was nuts. Everyone went wild. And so when I think about the great rivalries in esports and the great rivalries in Siege, I think about, we need people like Huck and Idra style rivalries, right? We need people like the Optic Gaming roster back, the old Optic Gaming roster in Gears versus everyone else in Gears.
So we need a bad boy Pistons.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Let's bring it on to the Last Dance. We need the fucking Pistons. Let's go.
The thing we've seen, anything to do with rivalries hasn't even been a regional thing. I mean, 9 times out of 10. Like, name the bigger rivalries that we've had in Siege over the past couple of years. EG versus G2. Or EG versus Penta. If anything, is probably the biggest one, but that's because they've met at a big stage probably more times than anybody else in Siege has, and it's been super notable because of the way that those matches have gone. Like, name any other one that you can think of off the top of your head. I may have to dig. Just a matter of teams that have had somewhat similar rosters going up multiple times, and it's become a big deal because it's, oh my god, it's these two teams. Like, I think maybe Empire and G2 is a good one. If we're talking about anything in a different region, like say ANZ, I know Fnatic versus Orgless, and then they became Wildcard was a big one for a while. I think it won't be anymore because Fnatic's not in the same APAC region, but it's like, if you have to dig for rivalries or to think of like big conflicts that have happened at multiple events or multiple matches, and you're like, well, it'll be a good game, like that's great, but to think of more of them is hard, which just tells a story about how there hasn't been time for that really to develop in the Siege space yet.
Yeah.
And I want it to. Don't get me wrong. I really want to see a whole bunch of like WWE style drama happen on LAN. I really do.
That's like Flashpoint. I think the CS:GO Flashpoint League, they hired a WWE writer to develop.
Wait,
oh yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, so I believe it was Flashpoint. I think they hired a WWE
like producer
writer to kind of drum up the drama.
I don't mind that one bit. Let's get more of that stuff in here. Come on.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of. There's this interesting dynamic in esports where we see, and there's a lot of, because these guys are young and because these guys are full of what my father would call shit and thunder, right? They're ready to go. Right. They're ready to go after the match. And I think, there was this great pop-off in Gears, and I don't think this should necessarily happen in Siege, but it's endemic of something that I think Siege lacks, which is like bad boy personalities, like we were talking about with the Pistons. We only really have one, and that's Fabian. And what happens if he moves on? We'll have, just everyone's gonna be a Scottie Pippen. Everyone's gonna be like, good game, guys, have fun. Yay, right?
I mean, we already do have a lot of that. I mean, that's what Fabian was talking about when he did the interview, or he had that score interview video come out about him, and then it generated a lot of discussion about, well, having these personalities is cool, but it takes some select people to really take it under their wing and be like, yeah, I've noticed that there are portions of the scene that are boring, so now what we have to do is take matters into our own hands and really attack this problem and be like, well, we need to inject something, and if it doesn't show up natively, then we have to be the ones to do something about it.
Yeah, so I mean,
I don't know anybody, and he's crazy enough, but I mean, if everyone wants to step to Lax, I would invite them. That man is, he's gonna walk into my office one day and ask for something. I'll be like, yeah, take it. What do you want? Have a computer with it on the way out. He's gonna bench me out of the building.
I was talking with Fox at Invite 2020, and Lax came up, and I've never been more physically intimidated. That man is terrifying.
Wait, how tall is he compared to you?
He's a sweetheart.
He's like,
yeah, he is though.
He's like here.
Oh, so wait, you're intimidated by a man who's shorter than you? Come on.
The man is built like a tree trunk.
doesn't mean you can't. Never mind. I'm not about to start instigate a fight with Laxton over a podcast.
Negative gravity. He's just sitting there like a coiled spring, ready to strike like a panther.
And you definitely weren't when the two of us met at the Invitational. It was the exact polar opposite of what Laxton was in real life.
So I'm 6'2", and I'd only interacted with Jacob online previously before this, so we had no idea how tall one another was. And I walk up, and it's Jacob and another guy we know, Brycer.
Yeah.
And
who is also freakishly tall, by the way.
Brycer is 6'4".
Mm-hmm.
6'4", 6'5", and Jacob is 6'4". But none of the photos that Jacob has ever posted make him look like he's 6'4". So
they're all from this angle right here.
Everything, he only looks like that, where you don't know what height he is. He could be like 5'10", right? Because the height on the gaming chairs is so weird, we don't know how tall he is. So I walk up to him, and the first words out of my mouth to Jacob were, "Fuck, you're tall." Right?
Oh my god, why? Yeah. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't see it. It's just like, well, you stand up and you're like, well, okay, that's a pretty disproportionate height problem.
Yeah.
But then everybody at the Invitational is just going, why? Why are you so big?
So I'm the shortest. I'm the shortest guy on the podcast. Then.
How tall are you?
Really? But how much?
6 feet.
Oh, that's fine. Nah.
Look at Short Stack over here. Look at him.
Welcome to the honorary
Look at him with
6 foot
his size 3 children's shoes.
Yeah,
tall guys and above.
It's called 6 foot syndrome. Anyone who's 5'11" is 6 feet tall. It's called six foot syndrome.
Oh boy. Yeah, no, that was great when we were able to meet for the first time. And the funny part about it was it happened while you were walking with Bikini Body around Place Bell, and then I go up to him. He's like, "Oh hey," we hug, and then Chowder just shows up behind him and goes, "Oh my god!" And I'm like, "Yes, now is my time." the first time I meet this guy I'm in a business relationship with, and the first time we talk about it is
he's too tall. I can't. What am I supposed to do?
Everyone was saying it. I loved it.
He's taller than me. But
it was still weird for me to hang out with Brycer almost that whole event, and for him to be taller than me, unacceptable. I can't work with that. That's not cool, dude. The man's from Cardiff. The man's from the UK, and somehow he's taller than me.
Yeah, you gotta get one of those shoe implants next time you see him. Just they give you the inch lift inside the shoe, so it's not too obvious. You get a little boost.
You gotta find someone taller than you, right? And then you gotta get one of those giant trench coats. You can just walk around as adult person McMahon and just go like, "Hello, sir. I'm 11 feet tall. How are you doing?" This is a normal height for a person.
Can we please put Magnet on top of Doki at one point, or the other way around? Just because we weren't able to do that at the Invitational this year. Yeah. Didn't you ask them about that?
Yes.
You were like, "Hey, can we put the two of them on top of one another? Put a trench coat on."
I couldn't find a coat big enough.
I'm so sad. So we have to bring a coat. Next year we're bringing a coat then.
Oh yeah, but.
We're doing this for the meme. Yes.
What was that again?
What's it like to run an esports team and try to let's railroad this into something we can actually reasonably talk about, which is how does one go about fostering someone like Foxay or Laxing into these personalities, taking them from the personalities they are and bringing them up, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. So I think with Fox and Laxing and the rest of those guys, they've got well-established voices. We're just going to work with them to grow their brands. We're not going to change anything. What they do, they're super respectful. I listened to the entire interview, didn't even know it was happening with Fox, and everything he said is spot on. And guys, he's awesome. So the rest of the guys, I really love the roster that we have. But I think if you look at what we're helping our younger players with, we have a 13-year-old Fortnite prodigy. He goes by the name of Redux. It's helping them find their voice. It's also helping them navigate and stay above the fray. I think it's so easy to throw out a sideways comment on Twitter or something that as a 13-year-old you don't think about, but at our level, when we go to say, hey, we have these amazing talent, you want to come sponsor us, you need to help these kids, and it's almost media training. It's helping them. It's making them think like they're 27, like they're 28, not like they're 13, but it's also helping them discover that voice. I think that's the most important part. Is I always go back to that. You're going to have two types of players. You're going to have The Rock, whose large in life personality may not be the greatest, the content guy, and then you're going to have the Mark Ruffalo's, people who don't really know, but they're going to be in contention for an Oscar every year. And so it's helping them find that. Do they want to be a competitor or do they want to be a content person? And then there's the rare breed where you meet the two in the middle, but it's helping them find that calling, and it's helping them, okay, so how do we, if it's a competitor, how do we get them into the most competitive environments as possible, as fast as possible? And then for the content folks, it's, okay, if that's the route they want to go, that's fantastic. How do we get them the most exposure? How do we help them grow their brand? How do we help them grow their voice? What knobs can we turn for them? But I think it's understanding their long-term goals. It's understanding what the player wants. And then it's just coaching them, especially the younger kids, through. Just sometimes it's with positive reinforcement. Sometimes it's saying, hey, this is a big gaffe by somebody else. Like this, you can, I mean, I think there's a kid named Zexro who in Fortnite who went on Ninja. They won $80,000 on the Ninja tournament recently, and he had some less than savory comments to say about the competition after the fact, and he's had to go underground because of just the backlash from it. And I think it's this instant platform that everybody has now. It's this instant think, speak that can really get you in trouble. So it's teaching kids to be measured with their words. It's teaching, and also just teaching them that there's more than just them now at this point. There's the organization behind it, but also their brand. It's impossible to walk back comments once they go out on the internet now. Someone takes a screenshot, it lives forever.
Yeah.
And so it's just really being about thoughtful, but I think the most important piece, and I think Fox said it well in the interview with you, is that we want our players to have their own unique voices. We're not trying to create some Yankees type culture where you can't have a mustache like the Steinbrenners did. It's really finding people that we like. It's finding the right personalities and letting them blossom, obviously within guidelines. I don't think, unfortunately, we'll ever be the Bad Boy Pistons. It's not the way that I want to run my organization, but I'm inviting someone come challenge us. I'd like to be the Celtics and the Bulls.
It's fine. He's old now. You can do it.
Exactly. But I think it's finding the right temperament. It's finding the right personality. So part of it is there's by doing due diligence on the front end, you're fostering less, and you're really, well, fostering is actually the right word. I use the word cultivate a lot. I think it's just helping them find their voice, helping them find how they want to communicate outwardly, and then it's, okay, this is what we're working with. How can we cultivate a strategy around them to get them to their next goal? Because ultimately, for us, it's a two-sided relationship. We want our players to grow and make it, and also our value, the value of Oxygen, that is deriving. These guys make star players even bigger stars, and they make undiscovered players stars. And I think that's the whole point, is we want to make these players more valuable after joining us than before they joined us. I think that's the value of the org. And then it's that sweet spot of finding, okay, how can we all profit and have fun in that growth period when we're taking someone from undiscovered to a superstar, or taking someone who's well established and taking them into the pantheon of Rainbow Six or Rocket League.
Yeah, and I think that's something really interesting to talk about specifically, because we see a lot of these organizations like to go into sort of something like Siege. Previously, the Reciprocity team, they used to do video series where they, because they were based more in, I think they were originally based in Vegas.
They've been based in Vegas for a bit. I don't know they were in Los Angeles when they were back as Cloud9, and then when they got signed to Rec, they all moved into Vegas.
The organization.
The org. I believe
yeah.
so. Yeah.
So when we're talking about building these personalities, I think it's really interesting to compare the similar styles of Oxygen and Reciprocity, because you used to see Reciprocity, they would take their team and they would go paintballing, or they would take their team and they would go drive buggies out in the desert.
Yep.
Right? And so we look at sort of, that's almost like a natural progression where Reciprocity was building the team identity, to now Oxygen is building the player identity as well as the team identity.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of talked about it seems crazy that it's been 28 days since we announced everything. The next phase of the infrastructure is that content piece, is that more traditional org type structure where there's the merchandise. I think that strange to see an org come online as fast as we did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of explains, at least to us, where we focused all of our resources in making sure the players were all set, the players were happy. And then for us, it was, okay, then we'll figure out our monetization channels as we grow into it. But the content piece is huge, and the merchandise piece is huge, and you'll start to see that being spun up through June. And I think that you're going to start to see the players and what the reciprocity guys did was great. I mean, they were a world-class org. What happened to them was an unfortunate sign of the times. I don't think that there's many other explanations than that. And so we're fortunate enough to inherit a well-liked roster and a well-developed brand around that roster. So we don't want to undo what's been done. We just simply want to take it and put our own unique spin on it, especially with the guys that we currently have, and then find unique identities for our other rosters as we start to build those out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do we have anything else? And we had some other things in that we were talking back and forth, other questions that we wanted to see if we couldn't throw his way.
Throw my way.
Let's see what we got.
Sure. I mean, I guess here's a question for you. So while you were in, I guess you could say, a business relationship with Genji, would that be accurate to say? Or
Yeah. I mean, but it was more. I mean, it grew to be more than that. But yeah, it was started that way.
So you guys started off as a business relationship with Genji because they had a lot of the analytics stuff with their sort of games, and that grew into a merger. And then when you guys became Oxygen Esports through the Helix and Genji merger, you went from technically having 0 teams to having 7 teams, I think now?
We now have 6.
6.
Yeah, 6.
So,
if I'm counting correctly.
Yep. So 6 teams in the span of the stroke of a pen, right? So I guess the question is, what's the infrastructure necessary? And, do you guys feel that you have the infrastructure necessary to immediately hit the ground running with all 6 teams?
It's a great question. So yeah, I think we had the infrastructure. And so I think as soon as I say that we have the infrastructure, I think we're being wasteful. I think that's the one approach that we're taking. And I think that goes back to the idea of the gated franchise leagues as well, from its capital efficiency. So we're running, we have a lean team, but we have a really strong team. And I think our team with Adam and Faraz, who are both highly, highly talented in the team management space, we've been able to divide and conquer the rosters. And then with William leading the analytics practice and the player identification practice, we have well-defined silos. And then from the Helix component, we've got Jack, who's my younger brother, and my dad running the Helix centers. And then I'm lucky enough that I get to span all 3 of the businesses and kind of just learn from all the amazing people that we have in each silo. But we have an amazing team underneath the Helix staff. We've got an amazing team underneath. So Tim Edmonds, he runs our tournament organization and all of our strategic programming, our director of ops, Patrick Kenyon. We have an amazing team underneath each of these business units as well that support some more of the, what I'll call business unit specific initiatives. So for like the Siege tournaments, that's going to be Tim and Patrick working tirelessly with the organizers, the third party organizers with Ubisoft, if we can get them to come in and get involved on that. And so we definitely have the infrastructure. And then if you look at the team piece, it's Adam, it's Faraz, it's myself helping out with the player management. But and then we have got the coaches. The beautiful thing is that with the rosters, especially for Siege and for Rocket League, we made one pretty large acquisition in the Rocket League space, but the rosters were set and the players were happy. And the coaches were happy. And I think the worst thing that we could have done is step in and be too heavy-handed. So we've given a fair amount of autonomy to the rosters, to the coaches, to the players. And I think that's the approach that we're going to take, especially with the more developed teams where they already have that voice, where they already have that identity, is give them autonomy, give them support where they need it, and give them everything they need to be successful. But we don't want to be overbearing. And I think that there's certain organizations that have like a general manager, an assistant manager, 2 coaches, an analyst for each. It's just like that to me. Even as a college lacrosse player, that's overload. It's information overload. Let me play. At a certain point, we know what we're doing, so we're letting them run. But yeah, we certainly have the infrastructure in place to run lean, to run capitally efficient. That's smart for the business, but that supports all of the businesses that we have, including the team, including the rosters, sufficiently, and I think more than sufficiently.
Oh yeah, no, it's it's a really interesting approach to talk about this, because it's almost venture capital-y, which is you sort of come in, you buy a team, and you say, hey, we understand that you are a pretty self-functioning unit at this point, so you let us know what you need. We'll get it to you. We'll stay out of your hair and just keep winning.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're the talent. They're the experts. And again, we exist to make them more successful than they were now, and to provide them the resources to get there. And it's a healthy marriage. And I think there's going to be some rosters that require more hand-holding than others, similar to a venture portfolio, where you have some companies that take off like a rocket ship, and it's just get the hell out of the way. And there's some companies that require a little bit of TLC. And I think right now, I mean, we've got our Siege roster is one of those. They're going to get going and playing in June. We got to get them a couple things just like equipment wise. But other than that, stay out of the way, and they're going to go win a bunch of games. And then we've had to make some more. We had to make a big move in the Rocket League team, where the core of our roster is fantastic. The management staff around is fantastic. We just needed to shore up a badass player, and we got the world's best player, in my opinion, and the European MVP on the team from Dignitas and Astral, and Farah and Chaussette were the existing core. And so that required a little bit more hands-on attention from us right off the offset to shore that up. But it's in a fantastic spot now, and they actually play later on today at 4 in the Fusion tournament. But it's been super interesting to see how all three of these businesses will interact. And I think it's going to be fun for everyone, for fans of Oxygen, for patrons of Helix, to kind of watch this melding. We're trying to keep them separate because there's certain pieces of our business at Helix that need to remain agnostic. We have a large boot camp business, so we have a lot of organizations that come in previous tournaments and will spend time. So we're trying to remain agnostic, but there's going to be all types of cross promotions where players that are trying to get discovered can come in and play and get that look from Oxygen. But at the same time, all types of Oxygen watch parties, kind of that social, creating almost like the sports bar of esports at our facilities for these watch parties. So it's going to be exciting, and I think we've got an unbelievably diverse and talented staff to handle each of these different business units.
Talk a little bit about one thing that was mentioned in that interview that I did with Foxe, and then another thing that you've mentioned is the whole transparency aspect of things. I think the part he specifically mentioned was that you guys were working in collaboration. He might have mentioned something about you guys giving a little bit more leeway in terms of like finding places to live and whatnot. Talk a little bit about how you've been able to work with everybody, probably more so within the Siege space, but just trying to get everyone from not based in New England to being, like halfway across the U.S., trying to get everything situated from a LAN perspective, and how you're working with them to make sure that they have what they need when they start up in June.
Yeah, it's great. So I think the first couple of things that we're working on them with is we are actively pursuing sponsors. And I think the most important piece, and to me as someone who's done sponsorships and partnerships in the past, there's nothing worse than seeing, and playing a sport, we were sponsored by Nike in college. There's nothing worse than the kid that has a Nike sponsorship that wears his Adidas cleats covered up with tape. And so it's working with the guys and saying, hey, you know what? Obviously, the organization, we need to bring in revenue, so sponsorships are important. If you had your pick, what do you believe? Where would you guys like to see sponsors from? And so we're fielding requests, and while we can't promise that we're going to be able to do it, at least we're trying to listen, and we're trying to prioritize those sponsors. So for peripherals, for computers, for monitors, we're trying to prioritize those sponsors so they feel like they have a vision, they feel like they're being heard. Same with the merchandise perspective as well. They were very clear. They were very upfront from the beginning that they wanted to have an input on our merchandise, and we're rolling out our first, I'm not going to call it a line, but our first set of merchandise over the next couple of weeks. We're getting some of the designs finalized and ready for print, and they're going to have an input, and we're going to give them the ability to say, hey, I like this item a lot. This is what I'd change about this item. But we want them to be proud, and we want them to want to support the stuff that we're putting out. So it's not two separate bodies within the team being like, oh, that stuff's so lame, I'm not going to push it. Because honestly, if it's better for us, if they like the merchandise, if they're going to wear it, and it's going to be more promoted that way. And so for us, it's trying to strike that balance of, okay, we have a good idea of what we want to do, but we want our player's identity, which is our identity, to be kind of infused throughout each step of the process. And then as far as like the living space, they need to be in Vegas. But we've given them an option. They've looked at a couple of houses. They've currently got a house there, and we'll make a decision. But they're being consulted. We're not dictating down to them as to where they need to live. I think we have an idea of where they should live just based on some competitive components around internet and internet in Vegas being horrible, but it really does. It really needs to be a collaboration because, especially with these established rosters, they are desirable assets, and there are a lot of organizations that have been in the game longer that could say, hey, we have so much to offer, but especially for our rosters that we have now, it's, hey, you guys are the lifeblood of this business. We want to work with you. This is a partnership. You can have it. Not only can you play for us, you can actually have a hand in shaping this brand, and that could provide them opportunities once they're done playing throughout their playing days, and almost looking to step into, if they want to work in the esports space, okay, you've been an unbelievable ambassador for this brand. Come work on the organizational side and help us, similar to that, to you guys mentioned that player experience, come step over. And so that's where we're giving them the sense of ownership that this organization is, because we're new, there's still that forming identity, that they can be an integral part in forming that identity is a big piece.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, take a look at a brand like Dark Zero, where recently they had one of their coaches move up to a management position, right?
It's awesome. That would be the goal.
He was with that team since sort of the inception, and basically he had a great working relationship with the brand, and the brand said, hey, if you're retiring from being a coach, we'd love to have you on the management staff, and I think that's sort of a really great thing to see. And we see that a lot in sort of the traditional sports. I mean, Magic Johnson and the Wizards, right?
Yeah.
Yep, that's going.
Yeah, we see a lot. There's, a player, Wilkie. He's one of the managers over at NC Sports after being a player. There's a lot of,
but he's like the general manager of the org itself, and not just like specific to Siege where he used to play.
Yeah,
like he really got his comeuppance, right?
So and I think this is something that a lot of esports teams sort of miss when they're started by people who get into the scene from more of like a pure finance background instead of your background, which is semi-pro Call of Duty, college athlete, NCAA level, sort of that kind of stuff, which is a lot of the players sort of know what to do already when it comes to both playing and if they know how to do that, then they can be fostered into these management positions where they can work better than someone who comes from, sort of an outside role.
100%. And I think that is the goal. And I think especially if you look at the lifetime of an esports athlete, it typically conflicts with college. And so I think it gives another aspect of when they're done playing. It's okay, do I go back to college, or can I leverage the relationships I've built? Can I leverage the expertise I have to step into the industry in another capacity? And I think that's another area where we'd love to build out our organization from a grassroots level. It's all about, from us, it's grassroots. It's starting with the community from a Helix perspective all the way up to the organization. It's truly trying to embrace and create a transparent amateur to pro pipeline, and then transparent player to management pipeline, even in that capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned you've got the one facility in New York and the one facility based in Boston. You've got a third one that you mentioned as well, right?
Yeah, it's a third one. So it's actually, we're moving it. It's we have a VR partnership with a company called Saber VR, and they're moving their facilities from a mall in Freehold into a Sky Zone. And so we're actually going to be partnering with Sky Zone on a location down in central, southern, eastern Jersey.
God, that's got to be terrifying.
Southern Jersey, yeah.
Oh no, I was more referring to the fact that you're going to be on a trampoline and a VR headset. That's
God, yeah.
that would be a liability. So no, they've got a lot of.
What do you mean I can't wear the headset on the trampoline? Come on, man.
A lot of broken legs, but no, they have
believe I can fly.
They've got a huge open space where they're trying to add other components of entertainment, and so I think we'll have a smaller Helix footprint where we usually have over 100 PCs. We'll have somewhere between 40 to 60, and we'll have the VR setups as well. And I think from as soon as we shore up our capital raise, we're going to have 3 to 5 more of our larger Helixes throughout the East Coast, probably over the next 2 to 3 years. And so you'll start to see that true local element where right now we've got the two big ones. You'll start to
Mhm.
see in every state, at least you'll have one major one where it's not this flight, planes, trains, and automobiles to get to the tournament. It's you could do you can do it in a drive, and it just lessens that it lessens the seriousness of the commitment. So you can have a much broader range of people competing, and that kind of I think that richens the ecosystem. Even if there's some scrub teams that need to get eliminated to best of one, in the round of 64. There's merit in just competing and having fun and that camaraderie. And so yeah, so we're looking. So we should hopefully have somewhere between five to 10 of these in the next 2 to 3 years.
Oh yeah, and it's also
Not just over on the East Coast. I wanted to ask specifically because you're putting all of this investment into the stuff that's happening within Siege in Vegas. Would there ever be a possibility that you would want to try to get off the coast a little bit if you're already like establishing a base in a state that's all these thousands of miles away? Something that you think could be tangible at some point in the future if you're already putting that investment in over there?
There certainly is. Again, we look at every opportunity. I mean, kind of again, the way that we stepped into the team space was the right opportunity. If there's the right opportunity, I know that Vegas is crowded. There's a lot of LAN centers out there right now. So, and I think unfortunately with the pandemic, there's going to be less LAN centers. Just for at least for the short term, I think it's gonna you'll see a consolidation. And you'll see the players who are able to make investments now start to really grow their footprint. And I think there's definitely an opportunity if something pops up in Vegas. I know Adam, one of our co-founders, was one of the guys who helped build the Millennium facility out in Vegas.
Oh, okay.
And so yeah, so there's certainly an opportunity. I mean, I think for us it's establishing a regional identity first, and then it's choosing select satellite locations throughout the country to go after. And I think Vegas has always made sense. I think it's especially with their Siege team out there, it being sort of a kind of a hub of esports just from the convention space and all of it. It definitely makes sense. Yeah, so I it's not on the pipeline, but it's certainly if the right opportunity popped up, it could be.
I interrupted you, Chowder. Say your piece, otherwise I'll
what I
interrupt
was
you
going to
again.
say is that it's really a smart decision. I think that you guys already had sort of this functioning business system that works, and then you went into esports.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it was timing. We knew that there was always this what I'll call the top of the pyramid for us. We had the large player base, we had the analytics, and then it was okay. Did we want to simply create a system where we fed all of the players that we found into other organizations, and that was a viable option for us for a while. And then it was
right.
Or do we think that we can do it better, and can we develop rosters that are competitively better from a financial perspective and also from a player perspective? And right now, I think with the rosters we were able to step into, that we can make a name for ourselves around a desirable brand where you can get these and start to backfill new rosters and support academy rosters for these competitive players. So yeah, I think we feel that our approach it's a little different than some of the other professional organizations, and I think there's always room for a different approach.
So I guess sort of chicken and egg situation, which came first? The idea for having an esports team or the idea for LAN centers to feed into esports teams? Or were those concepts sort of at the same time created?
It's actually funny. When we started looking in the space, we were like, we'll never own an esports team.
Right.
Honestly. Just because at the time, 2 or 3 years ago, the valuations of these teams were so astronomically high. It was, how do you possibly get your money back? And so for us, it's okay. There's this undeniable demand. And if you look at over in South Korea, there's over 2,000 LAN centers the size of ours in South Korea alone. And so for us, it's if the market's coming to us. So we're like, we're going to start in the community, and we were blessed with an opportunity to step into these rosters with the reciprocity acquisition, and we couldn't be more happy to be in the space. It just didn't make sense to us financially at the time when we first started. So we put all of our focus into developing the communities and developing the players, because we figured somebody's going to have a team and they're going to need talent. And so if we could all of a sudden feed people into it, that would be the right play. But now that we were able to step into a financially attractive offer for these rosters, it's now our focus to kind of do both.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting sort of natural evolution of your business, which was, we're going to start LAN centers. These LAN centers will, create, find, and sort of espouse their talent, and then the natural evolution of the price of entry of esports is going down and down and down, and our business is growing and growing and growing, so let's just pull the trigger and do it.
That's the goal.
Yeah. I mean,
all right, I had two other smaller things to show up with at one point, at least while we're still here and we have a little bit more time before this podcast gets obscenely long. Do we want to talk about the logo?
Oh, please bring it on.
All right,
so there's been, I will handle this tag. There's been some criticism about the logo.
Really? I haven't seen any of it.
What's your thoughts? What do you think?
I think there's so many companies, there's so many sports teams that come out with new logos and no one likes them. I think, have you ever seen someone launch and like everyone on Twitter is like, oh, good job, tremendous logo. It's I think the places where we're all looking for feedback is typically negative feedback. And again, I'm realistic. I think our team, everyone internally, all the people that we circled with, all the folks, we're really happy with the logo. And I think that some of the feedback that really picked up on Twitter, we looked at it, it looks like every other esports logo. And I think what we're trying to do is sort of be different. If you look at our color scheme, it's completely different. I think if you look at some of the design, it's different. And I think for us, even if people, I guess, no PR is bad PR, people are talking about the logo. They may not like it. But again, I think what we're trying to do is different. And I'm very happy with the logo. I'm very happy with the branding and the coloring. And I think that you'll see evolutions of it. Again, it's not the first logo. It's not the last logo we'll have. We'll certainly make iterations to it as things go on. But I think people are talking about it. And I think it's different. And I think you're going to see a bunch of candy green and bright yellow jerseys at a LAN, and there's going to be no question in your mind
that's Oxygen Esports. Yeah.
All of a sudden you're going to see a blue jersey. Is that Liquid? Is it Cloud9?
I mean, you think about it. You think about, I guess, the coloration is important because we look at something like Optic, and you see 5 players in green jerseys, and your immediate thought is, oh, that's the green wall, right?
Yep. Yeah, but again, I can't go on a limb and say we haven't seen the negativity. I mean, it's natural. But I look at the LA Rams did the same thing, and I think it always trends negatively on Twitter. I don't think anyone's ever really gotten. I've never been passionate enough about something to be, oh, phenomenal logo, way to go, guys! Like you guys knocked it out of the park. And so I feel like the criticism is always more prevalent in public forums than the positivity. But if we took everything on Twitter seriously, we'd never get anything done.
You're not wrong. I think one thing I was a little curious about was I was someone who I made jokes about it, but I was never like genuine about, oh my god, this thing, like I do not like the way that this looks. It was always satire on my end. But one thing I saw as a comparison later was when Evil Geniuses rolled out their new version of their crest logo, as opposed to just having one that was all text, and everyone was going like, oh well, this would have been great if this version of the EG logo came out, as their first rebrand. And I keep on like hearkening it back to when we first saw Oxygen, and I'm like, wait, Oxygen just joined Siege. Evil Geniuses have been doing stuff in esports for a long time, so their reaction to something
like
new will be different.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, and everything that happened with OXG, my first thought was, can we please not tank like our perception of their logo into the ground so hard because they're like brand new, they just got here, we can't do this to them. And I'm like, god, this community is whack sometimes. But that was like the one thing I didn't want it to like stoop too low, but there still is like a comparison that you can make between the two.
Oh, please do. And again, I can't say I monitor Twitter that closely, but we've seen it and it's funny, and we appreciate people talking about it. And again, give us shit. It's fun. This is supposed to be. At the end of the day, people take things too seriously sometimes. This is esports. It's video games. It's supposed to be fun. People are supposed to get enjoyment. If it's at our expense, great. We've got thick skin. We believe in what we're doing, and so bring it on. And I think our rosters will speak for itself, regardless of what's on the jersey. It's the players wearing it, and they're going to go out and they're going to create a pretty badass reputation for us when they win a bunch of games. So again, it's all love, and you guys have as much fun as you want. We've got a thick skin, so it's good.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna tweet about this real quick. This logo sucks butt. Adding Murph.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just wanted. I had one more question.
Oh, of course.
Did you guys put the day that you were founded as your Twitter?
Oh my God! I was gonna make a joke on the way off. I knew that I was actually gonna. I was gonna give you guys the story, even if you didn't ask me it, and I was gonna say, how did I get off this podcast without? Yeah, it was a terms and services thing. It was.
Everybody does that. Yeah.
We did everything. We did everything by the book. We actually flipped the names over. I think people saw that about 10 days early because we knew that would flag, and we got a little bit cute, and yeah. So, with the saving grace was if I told you it was intentional, it would have worked because our hashtag was hold your breath. So I think that was the saving grace. We were able to spin that well, but I honestly thought that I was going to get off the pod. I thought that was going to be one of the first questions.
I mean,
no, but it was.
It was I think it's pretty much Siege tradition at this point to have a rebrand or a new organization accidentally do that and just shut down their Twitter account for a few days.
Dark Zero's done it. Fnatic has done it. You guys have done it.
Literally, Fnatic did it.
It's good company.
Oxygen Esports did it. Diffuse Kids recently, they're a Benelux team. They recently rebranded into the Lowland Lions. They just
their account is still gone.
They're
the worst part
down.
is it's not us shutting it down. It's Twitter shuts it down,
yeah,
and they have there's no support. And it's the craziest thing. It was one of those things that during the moment you're like, oh, this feels so bad, but like you look back, it's one of those funny things you can smile about now. Which I mean, a month later, it's crazy that it was only a month ago, but it was certainly stressful in the moment, and it caused a couple sleepless nights. But
when we first created the Twitter account for this podcast, and we released our first tweet, it did too well for a first tweet, and so Twitter locked our account, and so
for a little bit.
I wish we had that. I wish that happened to us. I would take that.
I had to spend time just sitting there emailing Twitter like, guys, this is the account for a podcast run by these two people. You can see their analytics. You can see how this would get these analytics. Please just let us use our podcast, please.
And then all this time later, the podcast has turned into one of the most shitposty things I think we've ever conjured. So it's great. We're doing awesome.
Yeah. So Twitter is my favorite hell site. I'll tell you.
Yeah, I was gonna say if they could up their customer service a bit, it would be very helpful.
Great.
I got DMCA'd yesterday.
I saw that. And then you added me. You was like, I get it. It was this guy. It was this Jacob kid.
Do this? Did Jacob do this? I got DMCA'd yesterday. And they did it for a post that was 3 months old, that contained 15 seconds of the song "Do You Want to Be My Lover" by a British pop band. And it was
insert British pop band here.
I was gonna say. Yeah, no, it was
by LaBouche.
All right, yeah, we get it.
Twitter's fun. Twitter's great.
Twitter is fun. Yes.
We get absolutely nowhere without all of our social media on it. All right. Here's a point that we can kind of wrap up to. Let's just assume that somebody like maybe has a chance to like go back and clip this because it can end up on the subreddit, it can end up kind of anywhere, and they haven't listened to the podcast up until like this point, and we've gone through explanation about what OXG is, the difference between OXG and the Helix, all that stuff. Oxygen hasn't had nearly as much exposure within Siege quite yet. That will change very shortly. But if you were to give, I guess, like the broader Siege scene, like if you were to say something to them, give an idea, like very brief about who you guys are, what you intend to do with the reciprocity lineup, and then for like the rest of the Siege ecosystem, just to someone who's brand new, hasn't heard about you guys before, what would you say to them?
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I think we are a group of people focused on building gaming communities, and that starts with the amateur scene. It goes into the semi-pro and then into the pro. And so we're lucky enough to have what, in my opinion, is the best Siege roster on planet Earth. Who's going to make a ton of noise when league play starts? But we're really here to build an amateur to pro pipeline and to really empower every gamer, no matter where they are in their journey of playing Siege, whether it's local tournaments, semi-pro tournaments, maybe hosting some challengers events, and then up to rooting for Oxygen. We're really focused on engaging fans of all skills and passion inside of esports, and that's kind of, I think that's our goal, is to take a little bit a different approach, is focus on our pro rosters, make them the best possible, let them do their thing, and then also build the scene underneath it, and for fans, give them kind of for the people by the people.
Got it. All right. I don't have too much to complain about after this. Not like I had anything to complain about before, because I'm like, you know what? They've got the money. They know what they're doing. I do complain about everything, but I need you to shut up when they have a guest on the podcast. Jesus Christ. Come on, we're trying to form relationships and network here.
Did you do your laundry today?
No. Oh, I was gonna say it looks clean.
From back here it does, yes.
Well, no, there's a reason. There's a reason that you can't see my floor.
Fair enough.
The reason you got the green screen wasn't for a green screen. It was to cover up all the stuff you had on the desk behind you. That's the only reason you got a green screen.
I mean, like, literally, I have a set of oars over here. So
that looks like a didgeridoo.
It's
the instrument.
To hang, we have a giant flag, and to hang it off the front of the house on Memorial Day, we have to have a setup, and our setup is hanging it off a set of old oars.
There you go.
So
creativity.
You got to do what you got to do.
Oh, yeah.
No, but the only reason why, I mean, you had a desk back there with, it was chibis, it was wine bottles, it was everything back there. So I think for your benefit, you're happy that you at least have a curtain now that's all green.
Once this pandemic lifts, then we've got to have some fun then. Wine bottles. It sounds like, let's have some fun. I'll drive up to Marblehead and we'll have a couple drinks.
It was Skull vodka and a handle of Tito's and some limoncello. So
boy, there we go. There we go. Now I'm even in. Now I'm in further.
I think there was a bottle of Goslings back there at some point. I don't know.
Oh, a little bit dark and stormy. Why not?
A man of taste.
Oh, man of taste.
I see.
I just turned 21. I don't know what I'm doing.
I'm 27 for the record, guys.
Oh, man. So now you're the boomer. Chowder, you've been demoted.
Now I'm a millennial, which means that I guess I can't afford a house or...
Do you still live with your parents? It's okay, I do too.
I liked being a boomer. It was fun. I got to...
It's okay. We'll find someone who's younger than both of us next. We'll bring on Hyper or Bolo next week. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
We'll find a toddler. It'll be great. We'll interview him about, I don't know.
We'll bring on my 13-year-old brother down the hall. That's fine.
Yeah, we'll talk about Paw Patrol for 2 hours. It'll be great.
We'll talk about how my younger brother plays. No, he's not on the TikTok train yet. But what he is doing is he's playing Siege on a Mac using NVIDIA's like remote play feature on like 60 frames at ridiculous latency, and he plays Cav as an anchor, and it is the cutest thing in the world.
Bless him.
That just sounds horrible.
Bless him.
Oh,
bless him.
Bless him. He's doing pretty good. Oh. I'm already really proud of his progress. All right. In my efforts to try to cut this podcast off before we talk about the Broncos and the Patriots for too long, and that turns into a whole other spout and me just getting dumpstered by two dudes who have won more championships than I ever will.
Let's talk about Manning for a second.
No conversation needed. I think that's pretty much the whole summary.
I think
not even a conversation.
I think 6 rings says everything we need to say.
Hey, at least I'm able to fit all my rings on one hand. That sounds lame. I'm gonna stop.
That's disgusting. That's so sad.
I don't have a segue out of it now.
That's
now
right,
we're just stuck in it.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Hammered Podcast. This has been episode 11.
Thank you very much, guys, for having me.
If you have anything you want to plug.
No, thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure. I hope I get to be a repeat guest at some point soon, and excited to stay in touch.
Dude, 100%. And we are excited for what Oxygen is able to do in Las Vegas, see how they play out, and that starts all in just a couple of weeks from right now. So,
yes, it does.
I don't really know what else to transition back out of, but Murph, thanks a lot for spending about an hour and a half with us. This will go up in a little bit, and then you can share all of this with your friends, and we will not be sure not to include any of those pictures that we found of you in your lacrosse days, even though it's up there on the internet.
Yeah, thank you for sparing me that. I appreciate
wonderful
it.
what you can dig up with Google
I bared all about our Twitter, and you spared me the photos personally, so thank you. It's a give and take relationship.
Don't worry, I will use it as this episode's thumbnail. I'm just kidding. No, we're fine. All right, thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good day.
You too.